Chapter 37. The Explosion. The corpse flower, I surmised, not only disoriented people with its scent, but also with its color, which seemed to trigger hallucinations with a single glance. It was no wonder there were no defensive mechanisms installed around the Jingjue Queen's sarcophagus. This demonic flower was the ultimate guardian of her rest. Anyone daring to approach the queen's tomb would be robbed of their senses by the corpse flower, ultimately killed by the illusions spun from their own memories. It appeared the stone beam above the bottomless chasm was under the control of the corpse flower, where a step onto the bridge of death would invoke illusions. Likely, past explorers and tomb raiders who came here, like Chu Jian and Sudi Peng, met their untimely ends without ever understanding what happened. Thankfully, Shirley Yang had been cautious, sparing me the same fate. Angrily, I cursed the queen and her ancestry, took up a gun, and fired several shots at the corpse flower on the distant sarcophagus. Bullets hit its branches and leaves as if sinking into rotten wood, creating no damage and eliciting no reaction. With nothing else to do, I regretfully stopped. Sudi Peng lay beside the coffin at the end of the stone beam, his blood spilled everywhere. We couldn't simply leave his body there. We had to figure out a way to retrieve him. After a brief discussion with Shirley Yang and Fatty, we found ourselves without a good plan of action. Professor Chun, though alive, remained unconscious, with He Yi-sin sobbing beside him, struggling for breath. The situation we faced was like a tangled knot, immensely challenging to find where to even begin unraveling. Fatty had an idea. "Old Hu, I think I've got a great plan for taking out that demonic flower." Intrigued, I asked him, "The corpse flower is that potent. What can you possibly do?" "It's powerful indeed, but not impossible to defeat," Fatty explained. "It meddles with sight and sound, luring those who come near to their deaths. We all wore gas masks, and yet we were still affected, signifying it employs more than just scent to kill. A mere glance is enough to become entrapped by its illusions, unable to distinguish between reality and fantasy. My cunning plan is this. We avoid looking at it altogether. We blindfold ourselves, crawl on the ground, and uproot the flower. How about that?" "That might work," I replied. "Blindfold yourself and start crawling across, and we'll stay behind to keep watch and cheer you on." But Shirley Yang objected. "No, that's not a good idea. Aside from Professor Chun, who has some knowledge of the corpse flower, none of us really understands it. How can we be so sure it influences through the five senses alone? This flower is extremely sinister, and a wrong judgment could easily result in death on that stone beam." "So what do you suggest?" Fatty retorted. "So you're suggesting we just leave Sudi Peng's body behind and get out of here as fast as we can?" "I agree we shouldn't just leave," I said, "but we can't let that corpse flower win easily. We have enough yellow explosives to shorten the stone beam and send that curse of a flower down into the depths of the abyss." As we engaged in heated debate, we suddenly noticed Sudi Peng's body in the distance seemed to have moved violently. We stopped our argument immediately and concentrated on watching what was happening by the stone beam. The spotlight had been positioned at a low angle to shield the eyes of those crossing the beam from the light. Now, I adjusted it to shine directly on Sudi Peng. His body rolled as if something was dragging him, continually being pulled toward the abyss beneath the stone beam. Just as we focused on the scene, the bright spotlight flickered and went out, leaving us to question whether it was a connectivity issue or if it had turned off completely. The entire cave was instantly plunged into darkness. It was a critical moment. I slapped the spotlight, attempting to revive it, to no avail, and hastily asked Fatty for the spare batteries. Fatty replied, "There are no more spares. The 2 sets of backup batteries for the spotlight are with the camel team. Remember when we entered the city, we decided to carry light due to the heavy equipment? We left the extras behind." Shirley Yang ignited a cold flare, and light suffused the immediate vicinity. A glimmer in the darkness, however slight, brought some comfort. Yet, we still couldn't discern what had taken Sudi Peng. Could there be other creatures in this vast cavern? From within the darkness, the subtle rustling along the seemingly bottomless abyss echoed, the sound faint but suggesting the movement of some creature. Or perhaps many, slithering in the dark, impossible to count. Recalling the terrifying snakes we'd encountered, I urgently instructed Fatty to pick up Professor Chen, not wanting to take any chances with whatever was emerging from the depth. It was undoubtedly hostile, and the best course of action was to withdraw. After all, as the saying goes, discretion is the better part of valor. The cold flare provided limited illumination, prompting us all to retrieve our wolf-eye flashlights. Fatty, shouldering the weight of Professor Chen, and Shirley Yang, supporting Yi Sin, whose legs had gone weak, we all pinpointed the direction and began to move back the way we had come. The sounds around us grew louder by the minute. Shirley Yang, raising her camera, repeatedly pressed the shutter. The flash burst again and again, momentarily illuminating our surroundings with blinding, lightning-bright flashes. In that transient light, countless black-scaled serpents slithered out from all directions. They varied in size, the smallest being a mere 15 centimeters, the largest nearing 1 meter, each with a black lump on its head. Some had matured, their lumps having developed into large, ominous black eyes. The snakes, with their black eye-like lumps, were extremely sensitive to light. They retracted at the burst of the camera's flash, but they were too many, thousands, incessantly pouring out from the holes, piling and tangling up, effectively blocking our original path and making it impossible to force a clear way through. The camera's flash and the beams from our flashlights served as a temporary deterrent against the swarm of serpents, a palliative solution at best. Once the camera's energy was spent, we would have no choice but to retreat, step by precarious step, in the face of an unending tide of venomous snakes. As the snakes proliferated, we were truly cornered. We had used up our supply of solid fuel, which we carried on our venture into the city, while exploring the temple. Now, without any options at hand, we could only continue our retreat. Engulfed by creeping black snakes, with the situation critically urgent, Fatty suddenly pointed to a geological formation behind us and exclaimed, "There's a small cave over there. Let's hide in there for now." Looking back, I realized it wasn't a cave but rather an old, sizable crack in the mountain, seemingly just tall enough to accommodate a person. Though its depth was unknown, out of sheer desperation, we retreated into the crack, hoping it would provide temporary respite and offer us a later chance to strategize our next steps. With great urgency, we dragged the incapacitated Professor Chen and Yi Sin into the crevice in the mountain's belly. The space was narrow at the top and wider at the bottom, and surprisingly deep. The ground consisted of cracked fissures, but the gap was only about an inch wide, not presenting a risk of us falling in. Shirley Yang maintained her composure even in critical situations. Assessing the conditions within the mountain fissure, she noticed a large horizontal crack a few meters behind us and came up with a plan. She suggested to me, "Can we possibly collapse the entrance first to block the snake onslaught?" Just then, a few black snakes had slithered their way into the crevice, poised to strike. Shirley Yang activated her camera's shutter, and the flash sent the snakes recoiling away from the light. Fatty, with lightning reflexes, grabbed the shovel and aimed for the serpents' heads, then swept the dead snakes out of the cavern with the back of the shovel. Recalling the grisly demise of Hal Igua, I figured that being buried alive or blown to bits was preferable to dying from a poisonous bite. In haste, I fetched several packs of yellow explosives. Without time to calculate the correct amount, I relied on my experience as a former sapper, swiftly attached the detonators, and instructed Fatty and the others to head deeper into the horizontal crack within the mountain. I ignited the explosives, while retreating and firing at the incoming black snakes at the entrance. After backing up a few steps, we all squeezed into a bend for cover. I was about to tell them to open their mouths to avoid being deafened by the blast when a violent explosion erupted. The sound reverberated through the cave like muffled thunder, accompanied by a rush of stones and the blast wave. Although we were sheltered in the bend, the blast shockwave still hit us, feeling like a heavy punch to the chest, and our ears rang so loudly that I could hear nothing else. Fatty mouthed something at me, inaudible over the din. I shouted back, word by word, unsure if my voice even carried, "The explosion seems a bit too big. Are you guys all right?" I was so close to the blast point, and the acoustics of the fissure were such that even I couldn't hear my own cries.